Hi, we're back. Hey, have you ever wondered what it would have been like to live back in that first century and to actually have personally met Jesus? Have you ever wondered what it might have been like to have been one of the people in one of those crowds that Jesus taught, listening to Jesus teach? I have. And I have to admit, I've even sometimes wondered to myself, if I'd been in one of those situations, how would I have reacted to Jesus? I wonder, would I have taken his words to heart? Would I have thought that his teachings were interesting and maybe even a little bit entertaining, but not really worth devoting my life to? Or would I have been so impressed and moved by the words from that carpenter of Nazareth that I'd have left everything familiar just so I could spend more time with him and follow him and learn from him? I certainly like to think that I would have jumped at the opportunity to have become a follower of Jesus back in the first century if he had asked me to do that. But at the same time, I realized that when people back in the first century saw Jesus, there wasn't anything unique about his appearance that would have led them to conclude that he was something special. And we know that to be true because the prophet Isaiah wrote about Jesus, like a young plant or a root that sprouts up in dry ground, the servant grew up obeying the Lord. He wasn't some handsome king, and nothing about the way he looked made him attractive to us. That's Isaiah 53, verse 2, as it reads in the contemporary English version of the Bible. So, in other words, day in, day out of his public ministry, Jesus in appearance just looked like an ordinary man. He just looked like he was, one of the guys. Except, well, there was that one time when Jesus didn't look so ordinary. And maybe you know what I'm referring to. I'm talking about that time when Jesus' appearance, his entire appearance, well, it changed. And he glowed. Really, it was more than that, okay? He shone. We're not talking here, okay, about some soft, subdued, night-like light type of glow. We're talking about, the high beams of an oncoming car, blinding your eyes type of brilliance. Matthew writes that Jesus' face shone like the sun. His clothes became bright or as white as light. We're talking about some serious brightness going on. And while Jesus was shining like the sun, Matthew reports for us that Moses and Elijah showed up on the scene, and they began carrying on a conversation with Jesus. For your information, just a quick reminder, those guys had died centuries before. And the real kicker, I think, of the whole situation was what happened after Peter, one of the three disciples who were there with Jesus when all of that was going down. The real kicker to me is what happened after Peter suggested that they build three special tents, one for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for Jesus. Because what happened next was that the Father in heaven made an announcement about Jesus. And the Father said, "This is my Son, with whom I'm very well pleased. Listen to him." In other words, I think the Father was saying to Peter and James and John, who were there with Jesus, hey, you guys, do not become so enamored with Moses and Elijah that you fail to see that in comparison, they pale in comparison when it comes to reality. They pale in comparison to the importance of my son, Jesus. And that brings me around to the point I feel led to make, which is this, and we need to, as we approach Easter, keep the main thing the main thing. Personally, there are a lot of things that I enjoy about Easter. There are things that I look forward to, Easter lunch, Easter ham, the egg hunts and watching the kids, and grandkids find the Easter eggs and things. And I realize there's a lot of things I look forward to every year at Easter that could easily become a distraction that would take my heart and mind off the main thing. And the main thing in this case that we need to keep, the main thing, is not a thing, it's an event that points us to the person whose words we need to be the most attentive to. And of course, that event is the resurrection, and that person is Jesus.